I am the philosophical bachelor, and today I want to read my bachelor thesis, and I'll do so in several parts. It is entitled Superabundance and Excess. Is Bataille's conception of general economy credible? Georges Bataille's concept of general economy strikes at the core of our prevailing understanding of economics. He posits two contrasting premises in the first volume of the Accursed Share. 1. The condition of the world is one of superabundance rather than scarcity. Bataille proposes that all life and wealth derive from the sun, which is effectively an unlimited source of energy. In the general economy, what the world faces is not scarcity as foundationally assumed in conventional economics, but superabundance. While pockets of poverty can be found, the world on aggregate has an excess of wealth. 2. However, there are limits to growth because there is only so much space on the planet which life can occupy. Once the limits are reached, no further growth is possible. Hence, the excess cannot be used for growth. It cannot be saved, and it needs to be expended. The choice we have is to either expend it well or badly. Is Bataille's conception of general economy credible? In addition to examining these two premises, this paper investigates Bataille's method to reconceptualize how we can understand the world by adopting a radical position on political economy so as to derive novel insights. Specifically, I analyze his ideas of limits and savings, his empirical approach, and his critique of scarcity and utility in conventional economics. I contrast his view of capitalism and potlatch with Jean-Joseph Gouffe's critique that Bataille's solution of consumption has already come to pass in today's capitalist economies, and Georges Gilder's notions that giving is central to entrepreneurial capitalism. And I propose a possible Bataillean response. I then consider Andrew Abbott's extension to Bataille's theory of general economy, which Abbott draws on to argue that problems of excess are fundamentally different from problems of scarcity, hence requiring their own solutions. I conclude by assessing whether Bataille has been successful in challenging conventional economics and the applicability of the Accursed Share to political economy today. Chapter 1. Bataille's Theory of General Economy. The Accursed Share is a systematic exposition by Bataille of his theory of political economy. He begins by explaining the need for a theory of general economy. Bataille believes that economics, as a system of production and consumption, cannot study its phenomena in isolation, unlike the hard sciences, because its factors interrelate with one another and with other disciplines. However, the way economics is studied in his time and currently is as if it was an isolatable system of operation which can ignore the impact economic activity has on the world and how it is influenced by the world. Hence, Bataille argues that we need to study economics within a broader theoretical framework since we need to understand its general consequences to pose the general problems that are linked to the movement of energy on the globe. He terms such a study general economy as it is concerned with the global or cosmic level as opposed to restrictive economy, which focuses on the level of the particular. Why does Bataille link economics to a terrestrial movement of energy? Bataille observes that all wealth is a cosmic phenomenon arising from the superabundance of sunlight. Solar energy is the source of life's exuberant development. The origin and essence of our wealth are given in the radiation of the sun, which dispenses energy, wealth, without any return, he explains. Sunlight, our source of energy and wealth, is excessive. Its quantity is more than what is required to sustain life. The energy of the sun is first used by living things to meet basic requirements for survival, after which the excess is used for growth and reproduction. Consuming food in excess of the basic requirements allows a living thing to grow. When an animal's individual growth can no longer consume all the excess, it reaches sexual maturity, with reproduction a new stage of growth, but of the group rather than of the individual. In this way, living things as a totality depend on the expenditure of excess to grow. However, there is a limit to growth, after which whatever energy or wealth that remains must necessarily be lost without profits. Because there is only so much space available to living things before life occupies all the available space on the planet, after which no more growth is possible because there is no more space for growth. Bataille arrives at this notion of limits by once more turning to natural phenomena. He studies the microorganism, duckweed. Floating in a pond, duckweed reproduces until the pond's entire surface is covered with it. The boundary of the pond is the limit of growth for the duckweed. Once this limit is reached, there is an equilibrium of life. Unless some duckweed is removed through death or external forces, there cannot be any more new duckweed. Bataille uses this example to express the tendency for life forms to keep growing, as if life aspires to an impossible growth. However, growth becomes harder when a life form encounters the limits of space, leading to a buildup of pressure. This pressure can be resolved through extension, where in the case of a stadium, a higher demand to attend its events may encourage the stadium owners to put in more seats or to enlarge the stadium. Similarly, the earth first opens to life the primary space of the waters and the surface of the ground, according to Bataille, and when this is filled, living things such as trees start growing upwards into the air. But what if there is no more capacity to add more seats or to enlarge the stadium because, for instance, the land outside it is already occupied? The pressure can then be relieved through squander, when living things compete with one another or are depleted by external forces such as natural disasters or accidents. In the extreme, these result in death, creating some vacant space which can then be occupied by other living things, hence restoring equilibrium. As a totality, there is no more growth once the limits are reached, but simply a maintenance or an equilibrium. Any new growth will require destruction to create capacity or vacant space for growth. From this, Bataille infers that the history of life is not a story of scarcity, but is the effect of a wild exuberance and the development of luxury, where luxury is the production of increasingly burdensome forms of life. Bataille hence reasoned that to overcome this inability to keep growing on an individual or group basis, excess needs to be squandered. He considers this requirement a principle of life which we overlook to our detriment. This further excess, since it cannot be used for growth, has no alternative but to be lost, and in no way can this inevitable loss be accounted useful. It is only a matter of an acceptable loss preferable to another that is regarded as unacceptable, a question of acceptability, not utility, writes Bataille. Bataille is not against utility as a concept, understanding that as soon as we want to act reasonably, we have to consider the utility of our actions. However, he asserts that the concept of utility is only relevant if there is a possibility for an advantage, a maintenance, or growth. Since excess is what is left over after such possibilities of usage, it falls outside the sphere of utility. With no way to usefully employ excess, how else can it be spent? Since utility can no longer be the criterion of assessment, the criterion then becomes whether the way excess is expended is acceptable to the donor. Regardless, it must be spent, willingly or not, gloriously or catastrophically, writes Bataille. Conventional, or in Bataillean terms, restrictive economics is centered on production as the objective of human activity. Profit is the aim for actors in a capitalist economy, but the pursuit of profits is futile, according to Bataille, since a series of profitable operations has absolutely no other effect than the squandering of profits. Bataille explains that while this squandering may be anathema to the capitalists who are regarded as failure or misfortune, it is a matter of inescapable necessity. He writes, When one considers the totality of productive wealth on the surface of the globe, it is evident that the product of this wealth can be employed for productive ends only insofar as the living organism that is economic mankind can increase its equipment. This increase of equipment can be interpreted as capital investment, such as machinery, office buildings, and factories, or research investment and innovation to develop new equipment in the form of tools, processes, techniques, and technology. He argues that such investment can neither always nor indefinitely be profitable. Profitability will hit limits, and so profits must be somehow disposed of. Bataille explains that human labor and technological innovation extends the available space by augmenting living matter with supplementary apparatuses, increasing the capacity available for growth. New techniques initially use up what was previously excess energy or wealth, but in turn produces even more excess. This surplus eventually contributes to making growth more difficult, for growth no longer suffices to use it up, he writes. Bataille's explanation corresponds to the economic law of diminishing returns, where increasing inputs result in marginally smaller increases in output. What he adds to this law is how, at a certain point, the advantage of extension is neutralized by the contrary advantage, that of luxury. Beyond this point, expenditure will take over primary importance from growth, since growth is no longer as advantageous. Even if we accept Bataille's version of diminishing returns, it remains to be explained why excess cannot be saved. According to Accursed Share, Bataille ignores the notion from classical political economy that money has a special quality that allows for an almost unlimited accumulation of wealth, instead considering money as a form of energy. Sorensen claims that the energy from money comes from the social recognition of the value of money. Bataille's disregard for money can therefore be interpreted as a disregard of what is specifically capitalist about modern society, since precisely capital could never come into existence without money in this sense, he notes. To resolve this puzzle, I propose that one way to understand Bataille's position is to consider John Maynard Keynes' equality of saving and investment on the macroeconomic level, expressed by the following set of accounting identities. 1. Income equals to value of output equals to consumption plus investment. Rearranging this equation, we get investment equals to income minus consumption. Equation 2. Saving equals to income minus consumption. Therefore, saving equals to investment. Equation 1 identifies national income as the sum of the value of the economy's output of consumption goods and services and investment goods and services, there being no other class of goods and services. Equation 2 identifies savings as any excess of income over what is not spent on consumption. Keynes explains his conclusion. The amount of saving is an outcome of the collective behavior of individual consumers and the amount of investment of the collective behavior of individual entrepreneurs. These two amounts are necessarily equal, since each of them is equal to the excess of income over consumption. Following this accounting logic, savings on the level of the general economy must ultimately be unleashed as investments. However, such savings, in the form of investments, will eventually face the law of diminishing returns and the advantage of luxury over extension. Keynes' theory is applicable to Bataille's theory of general economy as it deals with the general level of the economy. According to Bataille, since we cannot save the excess, we can either choose how we wish to expend the excess or be forced to undergo the expenditure nonetheless. If excess is not expended in peaceful ways, it is then accursed. Like an unbroken animal that cannot be trained, it is this energy that destroys us. It is we who pay the price of the inevitable explosion, claims Bataille. To prevent such harm, Bataille reasons that the pursuit of growth has to be subordinated to giving, and to use the method of restrictive economy, which advocates accumulation, to address the problems of general economy will be a mistake. While his theory seems plausible, does it bear out in reality? The next section examines the historical evidence he advances. Bataille positions his method as empirical, though he admits to pushing his case studies to their boiling point to hammer home his message. Just as he looks to nature, he also examines the historical record to adduce empirical support for his theory of general economy. From his study of the historical data covering the Aztecs, Islam, Tibet, the early days of capitalism to his time of Soviet industrialization and the Marshall Plan, and potlatch, which will be further examined in a later section, he concludes that previously, value was given to unproductive glory, whereas in our day, it is measured in terms of production. Precedence is given to energy acquisition over energy expenditure. Bataille sees the two world wars as periods when luxury was more advantageous than growth. After long intervals of population growth and peaceful industrialization, the two wars were the greatest orgies of wealth in history. He observed that the wars were preceded by rises in living standards, when the majority of the population benefits from more and more unproductive services. Work is reduced and wages are increased overall. According to Bataille, and contrary to popular thinking, the wars were not sparked by an attempt to overcome insufficiency and need, but by excess. From this and his other case studies, Bataille thus believes that the true function of excess wealth is not to be accumulated, but to be squandered without reciprocation. He recognizes that the distribution of wealth can be uneven. From the perspective of the particular, scarcity is the dominant condition. However, from the perspective of the general, it is excess that dominates and presents its own difficulties, different from the difficulties caused by scarcity. I elaborate on these differences and difficulties in a later section. For now, having examined Bataille's theory of general economy, I turn to his method to better understand what he's trying to achieve with the accursed share.